This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our Patreon community. And this question comes from Brian Jackson. And I want to answer this with a kind of generalization of the question Brian poses. He wants to know what the impact would be on the American economy if the government were to have an interest in, a part ownership of, every business in the United States. In other words, the general question here, and it applies beyond the United States as well, what about giving the government a hand in, a share in private enterprise? What about it? Well, let's start with what some of the justifications might be. In many ways, the government helps corporations. It provides tax relief under many different circumstances, subsidies under many different circumstances. It organizes the curriculum of our schools, in part to serve corporations and businesses by educating the people they will employ and making those people more productive and therefore more profitable to be employed by the employer. Roads are built to where they facilitate commerce. In other words, the government does a lot of things that benefits corporations, and one result of that might be to say that the government deserves and earns an interest in running the corporation that they have helped make profitable. Then there's a second kind of argument, which says that the decisions made in and by a business always impact the larger society. What is done, for example, by a factory, I'll pick a place in Wisconsin, affects the community where that factory is located, or that business, or that office, or that store. It affects the broader region, Midwest, Wisconsin, and it affects the whole United States in various ways that we can imagine. For example, if it pays high wages, it may draw people away from other parts of the United States, moving there to get those jobs, and that will affect those other parts of the country. If it spews toxic materials into the air, the wind may take them to other parts of the United States, impacting. The inputs that this enterprise draws have to be transferred across the country by rail or truck or plane, and that has consequences. In other words, the impact on the larger society of an enterprise might be handled in a proper way by saying that the local government in its way, the regional government in its way, and the national government in its way have some interest here. They are affected by what the business does, and so they should have some say, some influence over it. And ownership is one way, not the only way, but it is one way to give some power back to the people and the institutions affected by what a business does. In a more general way of speaking, economics has developed the notion of stakeholders, all the people who have some stake in what a business does. And the idea is, if you are affected by business decisions, then you are a stakeholder, you have a stake in those decisions, and therefore you ought to have some rights to participate in those decisions. Of course, if the government is not democratically responsible, then giving the government that say isn't doing what we think of as respecting stakeholders. We're all stakeholders in every business because we're all affected directly or indirectly, but if the government doesn't reflect us, then giving the government a share won't accomplish what the idea behind this always was and is today. Now let me take it another step further. The whole notion of worker co-ops builds from the idea that one of the most important stakeholders are the workers. I mean, in the end, let's be blunt. What the company can do is either give you a job, activity, self-respect, income, or deny it, take it away from you. And these are enormously impactful powers that corporations and businesses have. And the argument is, if a business can deprive you of your job and your income, imposing the enormous burdens that go with that, not just on you, but on your family, people who have no direct connection to the employer, your neighbors, your community, which no longer has you as an employed taxpayer, but as an unemployed who knows what kind of financial condition. So the town, the community, the state, you, your family, your children, etc., all are dependent on decisions made by a corporation, but in the normal way of capitalism, have no input. They have to live with the results, but have no participation in making the decision. That's the opposite of democracy. And in the end, that's the issue, isn't it? The role of the government as our representative, we at least elect the government, is then to participate and have some say with the owner of the business, the starter of the business, the workers in the business. You see, they're all stakeholders. The only stakeholder isn't the profiteering business employer. But we've organized a capitalist economy as if they were not only the dominant, but virtually the only one. Profit is our bottom line is a nice way of saying everybody else who has a stake in this business, we're not going to care what you think, what you need, or what you want. We, the employer, we're the only stakeholder that counts. And profit, which is what we get out of it, is what we're organizing the business for. The small number of people who get profit determine what happens to the much larger number of people who live with the decisions that the minority makes. Not democratic, and you know what? Not that efficient either, as other responses I've given recently to Ask Prof. Wolff questions were designed to show. So yes, I think it's a step in the direction to give government an interest one way or another in the decision-making, ownership, or other ways. Stakeholders deserve that. It's long overdue. The monopoly of power of the employer is as detestable for a Democrat with a small d as kings were. We got rid of the kings because we want society, government to represent us all. There's no reason why that doesn't apply inside the enterprises that produce the goods and services we depend on. This is Richard Wolff for Ask Prof. Wolff and Democracy at Work.